Sometimes a weaponry designer gets exhausted from making general boring guns and bombs, and determines to make something unique. The consequences are often as refreshing as they are utterly wacky. The subsequent 10 examples are the kinds of weaponry invented by the fevered minds of technicians when they stop considering things like distinction and practicality.
Before we move further, make sure you hit that like button, and also subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you can be up to date with our interesting content.
Number 10. Northrop XP-79. Let us convert from the Third Reich a note, as they were not the only military to dabble in weaponized complex. Enter the Northrop XP-79, a so-called bomber rammer that was assigned to do exactly what its signature indicates. The XP-79 was composed to ram opponent bombers out of the sky, practicing the reinforced leading edges of its wings. The cockpit was assembled with armored glass that would defend the pilot from any collision. The XP-79 never went for the testing step, though not for the intellect you probably think. During its first and only flight, the pilot succumbed. His control from the aircraft recorded an irretrievable turn and crashed. Harry Crosby, the testing pilot, was killed, while the aircraft, upon endeavoring an emergency exit, hit him. The program was consequently rejected. Number 9. Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. This is for the Nazis. They did not lack for audacity. They were prepared to try just about any idiotic idea, if they believed it would help them to win the war. Unluckily for them, the comet only developed into service in the final year of the battle, much too late to turn the stream in their courtesy. It's undividedly likely that it wouldn't have expressed anyway. To get the positives out of the way, the 163 Comet was a rocket-powered aircraft, and a time when most aircraft were still pressed. But that's about it. For one thing, the aircraft was vulnerable, dangerous. To start, as emptiness would infrequently form in the fuel fluid, beginning it to explode when it shifted on. This fuel was also a fusion of two highly sarcastic substances that would spontaneously combust upon mixing, whether or not one required it to. Once in the air, the 163 Comet only had sufficient fuel for 8 minutes of powered flight, which drastically restricted how long it could operate. It also flew too speedy for its main guns to be very precise. The landing was a dicey position, as damaging landing gear made Me-163 Comet prone to reversing, at which point it would often reveal blue. Number 8, Panzer, 8 Mouse. Contradiction surely performed a part in the identifying of the Panzer camp wagon 8 Mouse, as it displays no resemblance to its namesake. Weighing in at a huge 188 metric tons, it retains the title of the largest armored fighting vehicle. Its topmost speed was only 22 km per hour, 14 miles per hour, but with armor up to 220 mm 8.7 inches solid. Whenever the lumberjacking eventually approached its target, the sequence of its sheer weight and 128 mm, 5-inch main gun would be enough to crash through any obstruction that comes on its route. With weaponry like this, the Nazis would be unconquerable, right? Well, that Hitler resembled to think so, as he was arguably the tank's most generous defender. Honorably, Mouse had infinite flaws that it held back. For one thing, a dominant engine was demanded to propel the monster, which was a terrible gas guzzler. Its sheer power meant that it couldn't even cross any bridges. Its enormous dimension would have also made a loose target for Allied bombers. They get an initial order of 150, but only 2 were manufactured before Hitler eliminated this project. Number 7, Antonov A-40. A flying tank seems like the kind of thing a 9-year-old practically, or Hideo Kojima, a game designer, might come up with, but that didn't stop Antonov required to devise a way to get a battle-read, white tank onto the battleground without gambling a plane being restrained by the enemy fire. When completely dropping tanks out of planes, and holding their crew's parachute down to the evidence to be an unfeasible clarification to this problem, but he had a simplistic solution: slap some glider formation's wings on that bad boy, and let it glide to the ground. However, as you might presume when trying to make a tank, flyweight proved to be a major obstacle. just to prepare the vehicle airborne, demanded the removal of its weapons, fuel, and armor. The test pilot explained the landing as soft, and was even able to drive it back to headquarters. Unhappily, this was not satisfactorily, and the agenda was ultimately abandoned. Number 6, Convair X-6. Nuclear-powered vehicles are an engaging proposition for any military, because it would allow them to produce for remarkably long periods. Unfortunately, radioactivity is a changeable mistress, and one must be conscious of its capability to harm as much as it accommodates. Just ask the fine folks who invented the Convair X-6. It was envisioned as a nuclear-powered decisive bomber that could stay overhead for weeks at a time to defend the crew. 12 tons of rubber and element would have been demanded to shield the reactor. While a few test flights were managed, the program was ultimately abandoned. The Convair NB-36H, portrayed below, was the only U.S. aircraft that conducted a thermonuclear reactor. Number 5, SLAM, Project Pluto. The supersonic low-altitude rocket SLAM was crazy weaponry, even by the examples of an article about crazy weapons. Envisioned as a third system of vengeance against the Soviet Union in the effect of a nuclear war, the SLAM was a thermonuclear weapon produced with nuclear power. A nuclear-powered ramjet would heat air slammed into the missile as it flew, which would give it limitless expanse, while the missile itself would stock an extraordinary nuclear warhead. It was also composed to carry multiple shorter nuclear bombs. Once on the final entrance to its destination, it would rain down its nuclear payload before the missile itself exploded at its final target. There were many judgments about why this project was scrapped. One of the biggest was that just experimenting with the thing would explain unfeasibly. The unshielded atomic reactor that powered it would execute any land it flew over lethally poisonous. If the radiation didn't do the job, the shockwave might have, as it was gambled that the shockwave force kills anyone underneath it. Eventually, anywhere the thing grounded would become a nuclear disaster zone. The government ultimately concluded that ICBMs could do a similar job extra efficiently, and the project was discarded. Number 4, Railguns. Don't appreciate the power of magnetic energy, you apparently will after escorting a presentation of a railgun firing. Applying the power of electromagnetism, this weaponry can accelerate a projectile to velocities in excess of Mach 7. The projectiles hit with even bigger destructive power than a 12.7-meter, 5-inch qualified gun, and with an even larger range, as its ammunition is smaller than that of a traditional shell. More extra rounds can be collected and conduct, with no risk of exploding if hit by enemy fire. Sounds like a precise weapon, not quite. The excessive heat produced by firing quickly warps the rails of the gun, hugely limiting how many full-powered shots it can execute. It also requires an extensive amount of force to fire. Currently, only 2 vessels in the Navy can produce enough to fire from railguns. Ultimately, the exact shots are hard to aim, proposing that a guidance system will be demanded to make it accurate. However, unlike the other entries on this list, the railgun is still being produced by militaries all over the world. Number 3, Boeing YAL-1. Since the beginning of the ballistic missile, countries have struggled to come up with a way to defend themselves from these weapons. The YAL-1 was Boeing's answer to this puzzle. It was a plane equipped with a chemical laser to shoot down any missiles system. During the testing, actually shot down to test missiles, but the laser was expensive and demanded a huge amount of power to operate. The plane that carries that was also a large, heavy, and easy target for enemy interceptors. The project was aborted and the plane was scrapped in many pieces. Number 2, Panjandrum. Shifting into the back to World War II, on the associated side. The Panjandrum was a project consisting of 2 rocket-powered wheels discs, propelling a cart full of explosives ammunition. It was designated to be used on a beach defending. The only obstacle once you denoted it at a mark and lit the detonator, it was up to the inconstant lens of fortune as to where the thing actually went. In addition, the rockets that launched it would sometimes come loose and fly off in unplanned directions. After a destructive launch that almost resulted in the weapon killing a crowd of VIP viewers, this as the reason that project has been abandoned. Number 1, Project Babylon. Third world dictatorships are like the irritating younger brothers of their more unconventional cousins. They want one to generally this applies to weapons of mass disruption. Dictator Saddam Hussein, in particular, had a dangerous case of WMD lust, and tried at several points to procure nuclear and chemical weapons. However, Project Babylon would have taken everything to the next level. Producer and project leader Gerald Bull envisioned a supergun competent of launching spacecraft into orbit. But Saddam had other plans. The dictator would have used the 156 meters 512 foot barrel to launch missiles farther than the Scud missiles he already owned. Nevertheless, the gun was so large and heavy that it would have had to be installed into the side of a mountain hill, producing it impracticable aim. Its huge size would have also made it an obvious mark. The project was ultimately cancelled when Mossad agents assassinated Gerald Bull. Possibly subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out.